knowing your owner's objective and knowing, what their exit strategy is huge, whether you're representing them or you're representing the other side.
Welcome back to RESOLUT REveal, where we go beyond the surface of commercial real estate. In this episode, we're diving deep into the real role brokers play, far beyond listings and lease signs. From strategic market intelligence to the power of cold calls, this is everything you didn't know you needed to know about what makes a broker truly valuable. Let's jump in. All right, well, welcome back to the show here at RESOLUT REveal. Today we're going to be talking about brokers' value. And a lot of times, a lot of property owners think that a broker's job is just about listing a space and finding a tenant, putting up their signs, putting up the listing on the internet and waiting to fill vacancies. But some of the best brokers out there, they're doing so much more. And a lot of times bringing much more value that a lot of property owners don't even realize. So I think we want to talk about that and, discuss some of the things, a little bit of myth busting on that concept, and as well as some of our other value add services that we're providing to owners. So first off, it's been a couple of weeks. So I just want to check in with you guys. How you guys been and what are you working on these days?
I'm doing well. Got a little bit of spring breaking in, and in fact,
did you go anywhere?
No, stay local. My wife just started her job, so not going too far away from the ranch. But going to fairs, going to rodeos, hiking bike trails. It's been great weather, so now it's been a good time.
Fantastic.
Yep, doing good. March Madness is in full swing. Big college basketball fan, so
who's your team?
Happy time of year for me. Actually, Arkansas, who had a nice win last night, so I was happy about that.
Is there a connection with Arkansas?
Yeah, I happened to go there on a trip once. I kind of fell in love with the city there. I went to UC Davis and Rice, who have athletic teams that leave a little bit to be desired.
Okay.
And I'm a huge sports fan, so I need a college team to root for. So I ended up buying a second house in Fayetteville a number of years back and going to a bunch of Razorback games and just became a fan.
Interesting. Cool. Okay. Well, let's get into it. So talking about the role of a broker and some of the value that some property owners might not be seeing. So what do you think of some initial common misconceptions that, property owners can have about commercial real estate brokers?
Well, that basically we're just overglorified waiters and waitresses holding our hands out for tips. Throw up a sign. Maybe return every other phone call that comes in, and just go where the tide takes them. As far as if the deal's going to happen, it's going to happen. If it's not going to happen, it's not going to happen. And obviously, or maybe not obviously, but good brokers provide a lot more than that. Not only in the execution of a leasing program, it sounds like we're more focusing on more macro stuff, but it could be as simple
we could get into some deep details. Yeah, for sure. I think that'll be important to do.
Okay.
But, go ahead.
You have to have your signs out, right? That's 101. But, you also have to be cold calling. You also have to be walking shopping centers. Brokers hate to walk shopping centers. Requires a lot of effort, a lot of face-to-face no's. Here in Texas, it's hot a lot. And I'm sure, more rigid climates have to deal with snow and freezing weather. But it's really effective. It's one of the most effective tools you can use. You need to be really integrated into the brokerage community. Having lunches, breakfasts, happy hours.
Okay, so first misconception that we're over glorified waiters and waitresses, right? Martin, give us one.
What sets brokers apart from one another? I think There are brokers that just take phone calls. They put up signs, they post flyers, and then they take incoming calls and hope the thing leases. And then there's brokers that do a little more than that. I'd like to think that we do a lot more than that when we pick up a listing. We do walk centers like David talked about. We, set a void analysis for every tenant in the market and who's not there and who should be there. Who are the other tenants in the center, and then find tenants that frequently co-tenant with those types of tenants. One of the things I love doing whenever we pick up a listing is I look at the existing tenants and then I'll, punch their name into Google Maps and look at the other shopping centers they're in and look at the other tenants that are in those centers and just start jotting down names. And it gives you a great cold call list just by doing that. Even after doing that for many years and thinking I have a pretty good idea of who the tenants are that'll co-tenant with that tenant, doing that exercise always brings a few more ideas to the table and frequently leads to some pretty good cold calls. So, and then beyond that, I would just say, given owners tough feedback on their properties, like a lot of brokers don't want to tell an owner something that they don't want to hear, so they just go along with it, and they say, look, if you're leasing a center that's a B- center, but the owner thinks it's an A. Sometimes you got to be very, very honest with them and say, hey, look, we're gonna attempt to get you those A tenants, but we also have to be open to other style of tenants as well.
So we're kind of digging into some of that specialization that a lot of the owners aren't seeing. One of the misconceptions, or one of the things I get a lot, especially for where I kind of qualify like a tier 3 owner, meaning, they're not professional investors. They've invested in a commercial property because, they had the ideas of passive income, or they did create a good amount of cash flow and wealth that they needed to place that money to preserve it. But a lot of times everybody's a realtor, everybody's a real estate agent, and we're selling houses and we're selling commercial real estate or whatnot. And have you guys gotten that like on your calls before, or owners that you've been speaking to for the first time, or
that they think that we're all literally
doing the same thing,
residential realtors?
Yeah.
Not that so much. Okay. I can't say there's been too many times where I feel like I've gotten on a call and somebody thinks that I sell houses, but certainly many owners that don't understand the full scope of what we do and don't understand, they think that, we're just making money hand over fist and waiting for the phone to ring, like we talked about, and then collecting a paycheck.
Yeah. So David, do you want to touch in a little more about that value add and that specialization that we kind of dug into a little bit?
Sure. It could be as simple as giving feedback on the actual shopping center's condition. It always, Austin requires that you keep a lot of trees or add a lot of trees to projects. Well, tree canopies sink; they go down, and the impact of having them properly pruned to increase the visibility to the shopping center. It's just amazing, and it's amazing to me how property managers don't get that, owners don't get that, tenants don't get that, so they can make those requests, and so something as simple as that, potholes. You go into a space and it doesn't show well. You have a bunch of dead crickets and, it smells horrible in there. They seem commonsensical, but very few brokers are that, proactive. They're too myopic. And so just as simple as, getting outside your box, getting outside your zone of comfort, and giving that kind of feedback to the landlord. One, it will impress them. Two, it can really help lease up the property and push rents.
For sure. I think there's also, well, one thing that I've been doing since I started my career, but brokers have a lot of ability to bring value, even not related to commercial real estate, brokerage stuff itself. Like, for example, there's many times when I'm talking to owners and they need to look at their insurance, they need to look at a paver, they need to look at something issues with their roof, HVAC. But for us, we build a big database of all those vendors and service providers so that if they needed help, we're able to give them a lot of referrals and options. We get nothing out of it, but we're in some form or fashion, we're bringing value to that owner in a lot of different ways. I'm sure you guys seen and do a lot of that as well.
Yeah, and I actually disagree with the idea that we don't get anything out of that because it makes a huge difference to the transaction if we are working with an attorney on a deal that knows what they're doing. A bad attorney on a deal can really screw things up, right? They can come in and fight on the wrong deal points and miss some serious stuff that could hurt the owner, and in turn that ends up hurting our client. It hurts us. Same thing with construction folks. If there are contractors that aren't doing their job properly, or don't know how to work the system, don't know how to get permits done in a quick way, that's going to hurt the tenant. It's going to hurt us. We're not going to get paid as quickly on our commission, right? So there's all sorts of every vendor that we work with is actually incredibly vital to our livelihood as well. So,
and that's a good thing too. I mean, us being able to pre-qualify and vet these vendors for a lot of owners too on the forefront, because we've done work with them before. And, we know them and had history with certain vendors that, we're able to insert them in certain deals and to make sure that our clients are getting the most value from them.
And on the tenant side, especially with first-time operators, first-time franchisees, this is all brand new to them. And so, like Martin listed out, the attorneys, the contractors, the architects, permit expediters, all the above. If you're able to give them those contacts, I mean, there's one deal in Port St. Lucie, Florida, where this guy's the most earnest guy, and he wants to succeed. He wants to get a store open. He wants to succeed. Doesn't know anything about the process. I mean, even less than your average. And so, not only giving them these contractors, but also walking him through the process. He's like, okay, I've called the contractor. What do I do next?
Right.
Okay, well, go out and meet with him, get bids, and then, we can come back and, all right, we're going to get the LOI out. Well, no, remember, we're going to get these contractors' bids back first to see what your, your cost structures or exposure is going to be. And, then we'll go, okay. So, yeah, I mean, we add a lot of value to the overall process.
Right. I know that, David, you've been doing a lot more work on the tenant rep side, locally and regionally and nationally. So, yeah, there's definitely a lot of value to be provided there. In most cases, tenants or retailers or small businesses, they don't really realize what all that whole process is going to be, what's going to be involved from front to finish. And they're really surprised about a lot of the stuff involved. It'd be great to hear, a little more about maybe that process or someone you're working with lately, if you have someone that you could kind of demonstrate, how you're providing value throughout that whole process.
Yeah, I mean, it's the Port St. Lucie example is the most striking one because of, how much on a micro level I've had to walk my client through the process. But got a client in Birmingham, and these guys are jittery. They're petrified of making a mistake. And so, then it gets into, analysis paralysis. And so, and they constantly, want to come back and sort of, I can't even get the first LOI out the door because of this. And, we have 45 days on the commencement. Well, why do we have 45 days on the commencement? Well, because the space is in really good condition.
Mm-hmm.
And, and plus the 45 days is tied to getting permits. It's not even tied to delivery. And so, well, then they come back, they're like, well, isn't 90 days better than 45 days? Yeah, no doubt about it. 90 days is better than 45 days. Well, why don't we do that? Well, the negotiation is an aggregate sum of everything else we're trying to get. So, you want to be reasonable in some places and push in others. But we want to do the 90. Okay, let's do the 90. And so, it's, I'll tell you, conflict resolution, therapist.
Right.
You take on a lot of roles because you're dealing with, or I deal with a lot of, like I said, first timers. Mm-hmm. And emotionally, you mentioned residential brokers. I mean, emotionally, this is the closest I get to residential brokerage because, there's a lot of emotions involved.
Yeah, especially the first timers. There's a lot involved. It's a large, in most cases, a large investment for them. They may be taking out a big mortgage or loan for their business, and there's a lot at stake, right? And then the value that you're providing is really helping to make that go as smooth as possible with the least amount of hiccups and high probability of success. Where we also kind of, I think we should touch on, especially on that, and maybe kicking back to our analytics program of where there's a certain way of, finding locations, and that's what commercial real estate or real estate is location, of giving that user or business the highest probability of success.
I have a good story on that. Just want to touch back to what you said as far as, they're taking out a mortgage, what they're doing to invest in these businesses. Mm-hmm. That really hit home 5 months ago. So representing a concept called Cookies and Cream out of New York. And we're working with this franchisee who's looking in North Jersey. And so the first space he zoned in on and even went to lease stage on, it was supported by the local market broker. It was in a price range that was affordable, whereas we were seeing a bunch of spaces that were not. So sort of like, when you're in the desert, you drink the sand. And so, but then thank God, the franchise advisor went out there and he's from that area. So he knows that area, and he drove by and he's like, guys, what are we doing here? Like, this is not, this is one block off of where we need to be. And boy, that block makes a difference traffic wise. And it just sort of hit me. I mean, this guy, this client, this franchisee, just retired from being a police officer for the NYPD, and after 20 years, and he's putting his whole pension into this business. And it's just sort of like, I'm not throwing the local market broker under the bus, but like, I didn't know it was a bad location. That's why I rely on the local market brokers for. But I mean, that one mistake could have just destroyed this guy financially and, and maybe another way. So it is a serious charge. Not every client, not every landlord, is a billionaire. So we really help people out. On the analytics front, the story I love to tell is that about 7-8 months ago, we had a brand new pizza client come on board, 4 locations, and 1 out of the 4 was doing terribly. And didn't make sense because they checked all the boxes that the other 3 did. And so we ran a study through our geofencing. So real quick, geofencing is, tracking of cell phones by these companies. And they're tracking where people are coming from, where people are going to, the roads most traveled to get there. Well, they're also logging us. They're logging us as far as where we're going and how long we're staying. So we ran the study. And this is a sit-down concept. And what the study showed is that on average, customers at this 4th location were staying 35 minutes less than at the other 3 locations, and they weren't returning. So what that told us was it wasn't a real estate issue, a market issue, a cannibalization issue. It was a ops issue, management. And so the big boss man went in there, cleared house, put in a new management team, and now it does, just as well, if not better than the other three. And so we didn't make any money off of that, right? Like the thought was that, the real estate was, the problem, and that we need to locate them. And how do you relocate them so you don't cannibalize off the other three? No, what we discovered was it was management. So we didn't get the fee that time, but we certainly, won their loyalty and, was able to, save them from making a mistake.
Yeah. I mean, on the landlord side, which I think is where we started the conversation, we had all sorts of value in ways that, aren't obvious in the beginning, like, keeping track of all of the leads that are coming in on that property and other properties. And a good example of this is we had a property out in Orange, Texas a while back. It was a Walmart shadow anchored property. And we picked it up as a lease listing with the hope that we would fill it up and then sell it. So we end up leasing out. There was like a former Blockbuster in cap that I can't remember who the tenant was that took it over after Blockbuster, but it was initially a Blockbuster. Then whoever that next tenant was went dark, and we end up filling it up. This is at the time that mattress stores were going crazy, and we got Mattress One in on the end cap, so we're ready to bring it to market. And so we're putting together the package, about to go out to market, and lo and behold, we're negotiating the renewal with T-Mobile, and the owner had full confidence that they were going to renew. T-Mobile just decides to leave, and it's a 12,000 square foot center or something, so losing a 1,600 square foot T-Mobile was a big deal. And we had meticulously put every lead that called in on that center into our database. And, immediately, as soon as T-Mobile told us that they were leaving, we knew that a Cricket franchisee had called on the center, wanted to be in there, went into Salesforce, went straight to that lead, made one phone call to that operator. He said, "Hey, send me over a proposal right now." Well, I think T-Mobile had been paying like $22 a foot at this location. And we send out an LOI to Cricket at $28. He signs the LOI. And we have a lease within a week and a half. We had a signed lease from a Cricket franchisee that had like 150 locations. He was a strong operator. So it ended up being very beneficial to the owner that they went out. But the fact of the matter is, if we hadn't cataloged that lead and had it right in our system, it may have taken a while for us to find the right backfill for that space. That operator may have never noticed it. He may have noticed it. It may have taken him a while, but we were able to not skip a beat, still take it to market. The owner had a time crunch. He was involved in another deal. He wanted to sell this center real quick, and we were able to sell that shopping center, and the owner was extremely pleased with it.
Yeah, good story. Yeah, it's definitely brokers' ability to aggregate a lot of data in the market, especially when it comes to databasing and contacts and who's looking for what, and being able to know that. That's kind of one thing that I, in my business as a broker, is, I heavily utilize market intel and research, and of which I'm always sharing with owners and also tenants, like showing them where the spaces are. A lot of times people don't know for tenants, in most cases, they don't really know where their competition is. If they just see that vacancy, they think it's the greatest spot, just from face value. But we're able to show them, everything that's going on around that space. It could be the traffic, it could be the entrances, it could be ingress, egress, facade signage, etc. And then on the, I specifically work with landlords mostly. So, for me, it's always telling them, what new developments are happening in town, what's going on with their competition. Mr. Smith's shopping center down the street just got who in. But that kind of information is always really important, I think, because they get to, really put their finger on the pulse of what's going on. Because, technically it's, for landlords, it's a competitive market all the time. And you've got to see what's going on with your competition, who's doing what they're offering to tenants to incentivize them to come to their centers, et cetera. So it's always a lot of information sharing that frankly, good brokers will always be on top of and keeping good track of. So we have our ability with value in technology, with analytics, and of course, the different hats that we're wearing to help people find spaces. And then our ability to create a market, like Martin was mentioning, because we know who the buyers are. We're able to bring our property in front of a lot of people at once that we know who are qualified buyers, and then also a lot of market intel that we're always keeping track of and able to share with our customers and clients.
Yeah, I mean, I had a call with an owner the other day. It was a property in Austin with a broker out of our Austin office. It was sort of an introductory call. This doesn't happen as frequently as the opposite of this, but the situation was that the owner had kind of pegged in their mind that this was $16 space. And, broker out of our Austin office has done similar deals. Now, granted, this is a 27,000 square foot space. So, we're talking box space. And our broker said, I think we can get $20 a foot on this space. Those are good conversations to have because, like I said, usually it's the opposite of that, right? The owner thinks that it's $20 space and it's $16 space. But no, I mean, he started mentioning a lot of deals that have been done around there. He knows the market backwards and forwards. That's why I called him to have him be a part of this conversation. Was able to support that number with a bunch of comps that he knew had been done around the area. So that if we end up getting $20 a foot on that space, which we're confident we can get right in that range, that's a huge difference in value for that owner, right? You capitalize that $4 a foot over 27,000 square feet, and you're talking real money.
Yeah, and just, I would always say that, landlord rep business will get you tenant rep business, and tenant rep business will get you landlord rep business. I'll stretch that a little bit to say, by working both sides of the fence, you have a really good idea of the market. And so, not very long ago, $20 on 16,000 square feet. Is that how big it was?
Yeah. No, 27,000 square feet.
All right. I knew I was getting that wrong. $20 on 27,000 square feet. It's just unheard of. I mean, absolutely unheard of. But we're representing a children's concept here in Austin. Once, 25 to 30,000 square feet. And we've chased a couple of boxes. And I mean, the former Big Lots in Cedar Park, they went out at $16 a square foot. I thought they were maybe $2 below market. Had 8 offers. The sign didn't go up. It didn't go on the internet, completely off market by that point, just by the stage of it, and 8 offers. And I believe at least for sub 20. And then there's the mega furniture space right outside of Lakeline Mall. And that's going for, somewhere between 25 and 30,000 square feet. That's going for $22 to $23 a square foot. We put in an offer at 16 and, they just laughed at us. And so, you want, especially in these smaller markets like Austin, you want your broker to be on both sides, because they're going to be out there just by virtue of servicing their tenants. They're going to be, they're going to be on a reconnaissance mission, and they're going to get the facts as far as, what things are leasing for, at what terms, TIs, rent commencements, all that stuff. So could add a lot of value that way as well.
So the value add of really knowing market rates and what the market can bear in pricing. What are some other leasing structures or strategies that a lot of landlords might not be thinking about, and also on the tenant side?
On the tenant side, so a lot of tight markets in this country, right? Knoxville, believe it or not, in the good areas, tight as a whip. Not as tight as Nashville, but it's tight. And so, looking for spaces that met my clients' needs, we just weren't finding them. I mean, we just could not find them. So my client, the franchisor, pushed me at one point. He said, he's like, I need you guys to call shopping centers. I need you to proactively call shopping centers that look 100% leased, and call them, tell them who we are, what we do, what we're looking for. So in case they have any tenants that are on the verge of going out of business, or that is happening, they'll know us. And it's sort of like, okay, we owe them that. Didn't really, think it was going to be all that successful. So I had a junior broker just call every shopping center in a trade area in Knoxville. And we got some great leads, some really great leads. So you have to be proactive. I mean, if you're driving around on the tenant side, if you're driving around, looking for, lease signs, in these tight markets, it's not going to bear a lot of fruit. I mean, you got to be very proactive, look for weaker players in the market overall. Raising Cane's, In-N-Out Burger, here in Austin did a great job of identifying, weaker operators at good locations. And they got in touch with them well before, the building went dark. You would see a Wendy's go dark and you're like, oh, what's going on with that one? In-N-Out Burger signed that lease, 6-7 months ago. They were just waiting for Wendy's to get out of there. So, it's proactivity. You got to be creative. You got to be proactive. You got to have relationships.
And that's kind of a great point of where, the broker is bringing that value because they're identifying opportunities that nobody in the market is really seeing, either through cold calling those landlords with their existing spaces, finding out who's coming up, what tenants are struggling and it's been a problem, giving good opportunity for that space to become vacant or, find a replacement for that landlord. And then also stepping back to, we touched on block walking. I mean, I think that is one of the most effective ways to know your market more than really anything else. I mean, going into those shopping centers and talking to tenants, Beth Azor of Canvassing Queen is like probably one of the most famous ones that does it, but going to find out what everybody's doing in the shopping centers next to her, and we spend our afternoons on Fridays doing that right next that, near the properties that we're working for. And you get a lot of good information, and you're aggregating all that data of which you could of which we do put into a digestible format to really get to understand what's happening in that, that trade area.
Yeah. Yeah. And on that front, I mean, I always tell people don't even look at it from the perspective of, hey, I need to get this person out of their location here and into my shopping center down the street. Right. Because in retail, that's not always going to be the case. But all of these retailers, if they're doing well, they're expanding all over the city. So they're, if they're kicking butt at their location, there's no question about it that they're looking for other locations in other markets, and you can flip them into a tenant rep assignment, or if they say, yeah, my lease is up in a year, and come talk to me in 6 months, and you put it on your radar, you put it into Salesforce, you set a reminder. 6 months later, 4 months later, you're back in their ear and you're saying, hey, let's talk about our location down here. And just knowing market intel, you find out from someone, they say, no, I'm not interested in moving because, this is my best store in the city. Well, that's great information. And that helps you sell your shopping center. So no, it didn't turn into a lead for you, but you can use it in your pitch to similar tenants that are looking at your shopping center and say, hey, that's their best location in the city. And they have, 20 locations around town. Why wouldn't you want to be in the same market?
For me, that's why I think cold calling is so important, right? I mean, I think majority of brokers think they're cold calling to get business, to get a listing. But for me, cold calling is, I'm doing recon, I'm learning about what landlords are facing right now. And you find a lot of similar things that they're all facing, especially in certain times in the market. And, again, learning, no CoStar report is going to be able to deliver that information to you. You're calling, for me, like I'm calling all down Fredericksburg Road inside 1604 and 410, for the week. And I'm learning everything about those owners and the challenges they're facing. And more times than not, their neighbors are going through the same challenges themselves. And it gives you a great opportunity to solve some problems for a lot of our clients. And what are some ways that, when we're continuing talking about leases and lease structuring, easy ways to create value? One was, knowing what's going on with market prices. I think we are seeing a change of where what we're seeing in lease structures and new leases that are being signed today, some of the changes in the market right now. For me, for one example is that we're seeing the annual increases really shifting now, right? Before we used to table it at a 2% annual increase, but we're seeing those increases be a lot higher in a lot of cases now. I mean, I'm seeing 3 to 4% because, that trying to hedge against inflation, but a lot of landlords aren't going to know that, right?
Well, and, every owner and every tenant is a little different in terms of how they approach these things and what they really care about. Some owners, big annual increases is a huge deal to them. And others, that's not going to be as big of a deal to them, and knowing your owner's objective and knowing, what their exit strategy is huge, whether you're representing them or you're representing the other side. If it's an owner that's trying to sell their property and isn't going to be holding it a long time, you probably know you can get them to fund you a lot more TI money than an owner that's holding for the long term. But you're going to have to pay for that, and and that's their main objective, is defending the rental rate. So if you go to them and you really try to get that rental rate down, you're probably not going to win that war. But if you go to them and you offer a much higher rental rate, but you get a bunch of money from them, then it can be a win-win. And so you kind of have to know the owner's objective if you're on the tenant side, to maximize the negotiation. And the same is true if you are representing that owner. You have to know what they are and aren't willing to do.
Yeah, because, you bring, a tenant to a property like Martin just, described, that's one experience. And then you bring them to the property across the street and it's family owned. It's been passed down, through the generations, and, it's purely cash flow. And they don't want to spend money, on the shopping center. They just want to continue to get their checks. And so that's going to be an entirely different experience, as far as, they'd rather have lower rent than be giving out, TI packages. So, yeah.
Yeah. There's a guy in Houston that's famous for that, and he owns really prime real estate all over town. But you cannot get $1 out of him in TI. And, you'll represent corporate tenants that go there and they're like, oh, come on, he's going to give TI, and you go, no, it's not going to happen. He is not going to fund TI on his deals. He just is completely ideologically opposed to it. But we can get you a great deal. We can get you rental rates that are, $8 a foot less than across the street, but we're not going to get you a penny in TI.
Working on a couple projects right now with that situation. It's it's always a fun conversation, especially with the tenants that are expecting that or have received that in a lot of in the past. But a lot of landlords are able to leverage that. All this for on the landlord side, like getting the $20 per square foot rather than the 16. Like we're trying to get the most value for our owners, and on top of that, to be able to situate their properties to be in prime position for an exit. And I believe that owners should be doing that all the time, because you never know what happens in life. I mean, things can change and they need to liquidate, but being positioned and ready for that is always a good thing. Of course, market conditions will dictate a lot about that value. Have there been times, or is there an example for you guys where you were able to give some good advice or be able to help them manipulate their current situation so that they're primed and ready to go to see the most value in their properties?
Countless times. Yeah, no, I mean, you do this long enough, you run into situations like that all the time where you're looking at a deal that comes in and you're able to give advice that helps the owner position their property better for their end objective. And whether that be, hey, let's, like we just talked about, let's throw them a few more months in free rent, but let's raise the rental rate a couple dollars. That gets your average rental rate up. It gets your NOI up. And you turn around and you put a cap rate on that, and that makes you more money in the end, right? Things like that happen daily in brokerage.
Yeah, and on a more micro level, I was negotiating a renewal with AT&T, and I knew they did well there, and that's, again, market knowledge, relationships. I knew they weren't going anywhere. And so not only did I get a good bump on the rents, but I also got them to give up their exclusive. It was a little, 3-tenant building in front of a Walmart. And so I got them to give up the exclusive. And, then the middle space became vacant, right next door to them. Well, I was able to put T-Mobile in there. At one point during the negotiation, my landlord said, wait a minute. Doesn't AT&T have an exclusive? I was like, no, sir. Remember, I negotiated that out of their renewal. Okay, good. So, typical reaction. I get very few hugs during my 9 to 5. So, just small things like that to have the foresight of, let's get their exclusive out of there because, it was a smaller town. So let's leave our options open.
One thing that I always do for our customers here in San Antonio is providing BOVs, or broker opinion of values. I think sometimes a lot of owners are scared to do that because they think that they're not ready to sell their property, so there's no need for that. But a BOV actually is a great way to take a look at the health of a property, because I'm examining their rent roll. I'm examining their operational expenses, understanding their current mortgage, and also all of the capital improvements or just areas of where the property has a lot of weakness. Could it be in the parking lot and on the roof, or all these value add opportunities that they might be missing in the property? I do that a lot for my clients on an annual basis, and more times than not, I'm showing them ways to make more money on their deals, and not necessarily trying to sell their deal, but there's ways of sometimes if they're managing their own property, they've overlooked CAM reconciliation they've overlooked. They were supposed to collect more money starting at a certain time. And then we're also examining, operational expenses of where they could be saving more money, and of which it does not hurt to, shop at different vendors and see what kind of prices, the better prices that they can get annually. And it really gives them more cash flow in their pocket. But on top of it, $10,000 in value per cap rate is a substantial amount of money when it comes to overall value. That's a wrap on today's conversation, and hopefully we've helped peel back the layers of what broker value really means in today's market. Remember, a broker isn't just about showing space. It's about bringing real solutions, guiding owners with strategic insight, and being relentlessly proactive in a fast-moving market. If you found today's episode helpful, share it with someone who's in the game or just trying to better understand it. And if you got questions or topics you want us to cover next time, shoot us a message. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks for tuning into Resolute Reveal. We'll see you on the next one.